In the quiet of our home, the memories of Amy, our only daughter, echoed off the walls. She was always more firecracker than flower, pushing boundaries and testing limits. As a dentist, I've seen my share of pain, but nothing quite compares to the ache of a child pulling away. My husband, John, a seasoned cop, always had a way of smoothing things over, but even he was at a loss when Amy packed up and left with that rock musician, her teenage rebellion reaching its peak. "John, how did we get here?" I asked one evening, staring at the empty chair Amy once occupied at our dinner table. One day she's sneaking out to concerts, the next, she's gone without a trace. John sighed, his eyes heavy with the same unsaid questions. "She's always been wild, Martha. Like a storm, you can't predict or tame it. But she's still our girl." But as days turned into months, with nothing but silence from Amy, the weight of her absence grew heavier. It wasn't until a photograph landed in our mailbox that we saw her again, not in person, but in a wedding picture, looking defiantly happy next to a man with a guitar and tattoos. No invitation, no call, just a snapshot of the life she chose over us. I remember my hands shaking as I held the photo, the hurt a tangible thing between us. "Look at her, John." Not even a note, just this picture. "She's made her choice, hasn't she?" John, ever the rock, tried to calm the storm brewing in me. "Maybe she's trying to reach out in her own way, Martha. It's a start, right?" But his words did little to soothe the sting of rejection. We continued on, our home feeling larger and lonelier by the day. Work was a distraction, patients and procedures filling the void left by Amy's laughter and chaos. Months had worn into a year with no word from Amy, and just when the silence seemed permanent, our computer pinged a Skype call. It was Amy, her face filling the screen, looking so different yet painfully familiar. "Mom, Dad, I need your help," she said, the edges of her voice ragged with wear. John and I exchanged a glance, the kind that speaks volumes without a word. "Amy, what's going on?" I asked, my heart hammering against my chest. She hesitated, her eyes darting away before locking back onto the screen. It's a lot. I've got a baby now, a little girl. And things, well, they aren't great. I need money, Mom, $1,000 a month." John's brow furrowed, his cop instincts on alert. "A grandkid? Amy, slow down. Why do you need the money?" She bit her lip, a nervous habit from childhood. "I just do, Dad. Please, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious." We sat in silence, the weight of her plea hanging heavy. Finally, I nodded, my decision firm, despite the whirlwind of questions. "All right, Amy. We'll help. But please, talk to us. What's been happening?" She looked down, a tear tracing her cheek. "I can't. Not now. Just, thank you. This means everything." The call ended abruptly, leaving John and I staring at a blank screen. "What do you think, John? Did we just make a mistake?" I murmured, the doubt creeping in. He shook his head, his hand finding mine. "No, Martha. She's our daughter, and she's in trouble. It's our job to help, no questions asked." "But a grandchild, John. A whole year, and she's kept this from us. What else don't we know?" I couldn't keep the tremble from my voice. "We'll find out, love. For now, let's just be there for her. However she'll let us," he replied, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. The days that followed were a blur of bank transfers and uneasy silence. I kept busy, the clinic a welcome distraction, but every time I came home, I half expected Amy to be there, waiting with her child. But the house remained quiet, our lives suspended in a state of waiting and worry. One evening, as we sat in the living room, the air thick with unsaid fears, John broke the silence. "She'll reach out again, Martha. When she's ready." I nodded, clinging to his optimism like a lifeline. "I hope you're right. I want to hold my grandchild, to tell Amy it's going to be okay. We will, love. We will, he assured me, though I saw the shadow of his own doubts flickering in his eyes. I whispered a silent prayer for my daughter and granddaughter, wherever they were. The plea had opened old wounds and new fears, but it had also rekindled a flame of hope. We were still a family, fractured and distant, but connected by unbreakable bonds of love and the unwavering promise to be there for each other, no matter what. It was one of those early mornings, when the cold bites at your bones, the world outside frosted and still. John and I were nestled in the warmth of our home, sipping coffee, the silence comfortable, if not a bit heavy with unspoken thoughts about Amy. That's when the sharp knock came, shattering the calm like a stone through glass. John and I exchanged a startled look, the same question in our eyes: who could it be at this hour? He stood up, moving towards the door, while I followed close behind, a knot of worry tightening in my stomach. He swung the door open and there, on our doorstep, was a sight that knocked the breath from me. Amy, thinner and more worn than I remembered, clutching a small bundle wrapped in blankets. Her eyes, red and swollen from crying, met mine, and it was as if the years of silence fell away in an instant. Amy? Oh my God, Amy! I cried out, rushing forward to wrap her in an embrace, the cold forgotten. Mom, Dad. I'm so sorry. Can we come in? Her voice was a whisper, hoarse and fragile. Of course, come in. John's voice was firm, guiding her gently inside as I quickly shut the door against the cold. Once inside, Amy unwrapped the bundle, revealing a tiny, sleeping face, peaceful despite the chaos. This is your granddaughter, she said, her voice breaking. Tears streamed down my face as I looked at the baby, so innocent and unaware of the storm she'd been born into. She's beautiful, Amy. What's her name? Amy hesitated, a shadow crossing her face. Lily. Her name's Lily. John, ever the practical one, sprung into action. You both look frozen. Martha, let's get them warmed up. I'll make some food. As I helped Amy out of her coat, the threadbare fabric and worn shoes didn't escape my notice. She was shivering, her body frail and tired. I ushered her to the living room, piling blankets around her and the baby. John brought in food, setting it before Amy, who ate with a hunger that spoke of too many missed meals. Lily, now awake, watched with wide, curious eyes, her little hand wrapped around my finger. Once Amy had eaten her fill, she looked up at us, her eyes holding a depth of pain and regret. I need to tell you everything. It's been so bad, worse than you can imagine. John and I sat, our hearts heavy with dread and love, ready to listen. As she spoke, her voice trembled with the weight of her story, each word painting a picture of a life unraveled, of dreams turned to nightmares. When she finally finished, the room was heavy with silence. I reached out, taking her hand in mine. Amy, we're here now. You're safe, both of you. John nodded, his face set in a determined line. We'll take care of you. Whatever it takes. Amy broke down then, tears streaming down her face, a mix of relief and sorrow. I'm so sorry. I was so stupid, so proud. I should have come back sooner. I pulled her into a hug, rocking her gently. Shoo, it's okay. You're home now. We'll fix this, together. Once Amy had settled a bit, Lily sleeping soundly in a makeshift bed we'd cobbled together, she began to unravel the story we'd been missing. John and I sat across from her, our hearts heavy, bracing ourselves for what was to come. Mom, Dad. I don't even know where to start. Everything's been a mess since the day I left with him, Amy began, her fingers twisting a loose thread on the blanket. Just start from the beginning, sweetheart. We're here to listen, I urged gently, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Amy took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the sleeping form of Lily. It was all good at first, you know? Exciting, even. But then, after we got married, things changed. He changed. The music gigs dried up, and he started drinking, a lot. And then, her voice trailed off, a shiver running through her. John leaned forward, his face a mask of concern. And then what, Amy? She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. Then he started getting angry, at everything. At me. It wasn't long before he started hitting me. A sharp gasp escaped my lips, my hand flying to my mouth. John's jaw clenched, his hands forming fists on his knees. That bastard, he muttered under his breath. Amy continued, the words pouring out now, a floodgate opened. I thought I could handle it, that I could make it stop. But then I got pregnant with Lily, and everything got worse. He didn't work, just drank and yelled and more. I was scared, all the time. The room felt impossibly heavy, each word a weight added to our already burdened hearts. Why didn't you come to us, Amy? Why didn't you tell us? I asked, my voice a mix of pain and frustration. I was ashamed, Mom. Ashamed and scared. I thought I'd made my bed and had to lie in it. But when Lily was born, I realized I couldn't let her grow up in that. That's when I called you for the money. It was the only way I could think of to keep us afloat. John stood abruptly, pacing the room. And his parents? What role did they play in all this? Amy's lips quivered as she spoke. They were just as bad, in their own way. His mom, she would make me do all the housework, watch every penny. If I did anything wrong, she'd take it out on me, on Lily. They all would. I reached across, taking her hand in mine. You're safe now, Amy. You and Lily. We'll take care of you. Amy nodded, a frail smile on her lips. I know, Mom. That's why I came here. I knew if anyone would help us, it would be you. John nodded, his face set in a grim line. Tell us how you managed it, Amy. We need to know everything to protect you. She took a deep breath, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee mug. It wasn't easy. I had to wait for the right moment. His parents were out, and he was passed out drunk, like usual. I grabbed Lily, some clothes, and whatever cash I could find. I didn't even have a car seat, just wrapped her in blankets and ran. I shuddered, imagining my daughter and granddaughter in such peril. Oh, Amy, that's so dangerous. But you're here now, that's what matters. She continued, her eyes distant as she recounted the escape. I hitched a ride to the nearest bus station. People must have seen the desperation in my eyes, no one asked too many questions. Each mile away from that house felt like a tiny victory. John's hand found mine under the table, a silent message of solidarity. And no one followed you? You were sure you weren't followed? Amy shook her head. I was careful, Dad. I know you taught me to be observant. I made sure we weren't followed. I just couldn't stay there a moment longer, not with Lily. I stood up, moving to the stove to busy myself with making more coffee, the actions mundane but necessary to keep the tremors at bay. You're brave, Amy. So brave. We'll make sure you never have to go back there. The day passed in a flurry of activity, securing the house, making appointments with lawyers and therapists, anything and everything to ensure Amy and Lily's safety and well-being. John was on the phone most of the day, his voice a low rumble of barely contained fury and action. As night fell, Amy sat on the living room floor, Lily crawling around her, a scene so normal yet charged with the undercurrents of their recent ordeal. I can't thank you enough, both of you. I feel like I'm finally breathing again. John looked up from his paperwork, his gaze softening. You're our daughter, Amy. There's nothing we wouldn't do for you and Lily. I sat down beside her, the carpet soft beneath me. We meant it when we said forever, Amy. Forever means through the hard times too. She leaned against me, her body weary but her spirit flickering with the start of something new, hope, perhaps, or the beginning of healing. I know, Mom. I know. As we settled in for the night, the house felt different, as if the very walls were bracing to protect its inhabitants. Amy and Lily slept in the guest room, their breaths soft and even in the quiet. John and I lay in bed, our hands clasped between us, a silent vow to face whatever came next together. The escape to safety was just the beginning, but as I drifted off to sleep, I knew we were ready for it. Ready to fight, to protect, and to heal. Our family, once broken, was mending, one day, one moment at a time. With resolve hardening in our hearts, John and I drove to the address Amy had tearfully provided. The house loomed ahead, shabby and forlorn, a stark contrast to the warm, loving home we had left. "Ready?" John asked, his voice a low rumble of contained anger. I nodded, bracing myself for what was to come. We walked up to the decrepit door and knocked firmly. Shuffling feet approached from inside, and the door creaked open to reveal Amy's husband, a picture of neglect and disdain. "We need to see Amy and the baby," John demanded, his gaze steely. The husband, with a dismissive snort, replied, "They're sleeping." "What do you want at this hour?" The blatant lie made my blood boil. "Sleeping? Don't play dumb. Amy's been with us since yesterday. She told us everything," I snapped, my voice sharp with fury. Behind him, his parents appeared, their expressions sour and defensive. "What's all this about?" "Our daughter-in-law is fine, just sleeping off her tantrums," the mother sneered, a vile attempt at nonchalance. John stepped closer, his presence imposing. "You think we're fools? Amy's safe from your abuse now. She's at our house, and she's told us everything." The trio exchanged nervous glances, the facade crumbling. "You can't prove anything," the father blustered, trying to regain some ground. Without a word, John reached into his coat and flashed his police badge. The effect was immediate. Their faces drained of color, their previous arrogance replaced by fear. "We're just a family trying to get by," the mother whimpered, her bravado gone. John's voice was cold, the anger controlled but palpable. "A family that preys on its weakest members? I don't think so. You'll be hearing from us, and from the authorities." We turned and left them there, standing in their doorway, the reality of their situation sinking in. As we drove away, the weight of what we had started hung heavy in the air. Amy, holding Lily close, met us as we walked in. Her eyes, filled with a mix of hope and fear, searched ours for answers. "They're scared now, Amy. Scared of the consequences. You and Lily are safe," John assured her, his hand resting on her shoulder. The night closed in around us, the house a sanctuary against the darkness outside. As we settled in, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The first step had been taken, the demons confronted. And though the journey was far from over, we had faced it together, a united front against the past and whatever future might bring. Our family, once fractured, was finding its way back, one truth, one moment at a time. The morning after confronting Amy's in-laws, John and I sat at our kitchen table, a silent agreement between us. Today we would ensure justice for Amy and Lily. John, with his years of experience on the force, made calls, his tone official and stern, setting the wheels of justice in motion. "Amy, can you tell us everything again?" "The authorities will need your statement," John said as he prepared a notepad, his expression serious but encouraging. Amy nodded, a determined glint in her eyes, despite the shadows of her recent past. "Yes, I'll tell them everything. They need to know what he did, what they all did." As she recounted her story, her voice trembled but never broke. She was a portrait of courage, a stark contrast to the frightened girl who had appeared on our doorstep. "And when Lily was born, things got worse. I was isolated, controlled. I couldn't let her grow up in that." I reached over, squeezing her hand. "You're doing the right thing, Amy. They won't hurt you or Lily ever again." Hours passed, filled with calls and visits from officers and lawyers, each step a move towards accountability and protection. Finally, with Amy's statement recorded and the legal process underway, we had a moment to breathe. "Mom, Dad, will they go to jail?" Amy asked, her eyes searching ours for assurance. John nodded, his voice firm. "They're facing charges of abuse and extortion. It's a strong case, especially with your testimony. They won't be free to hurt anyone else." The relief in Amy's eyes was palpable. She hugged Lily to her, whispering words of love and safety to her daughter. The day turned to evening, and as we sat together, a sense of calm settled over the house. "I can't believe it's finally happening," Amy murmured, a small smile touching her lips. "It's only the beginning, sweetheart. But we'll be with you every step of the way," I reassured her, my heart swelling with pride for her bravery. John stood, looking out the window into the growing darkness. "They'll learn that you don't mess with family. Not without consequences." We sat in quiet solidarity, the trials of the past few days bonding us in ways we couldn't have imagined. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, there was a sense of hope, a light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. As night fell and we prepared for bed, I checked on Amy and Lily, sleeping peacefully in the guest room. The sight of them, so serene, was a balm to my weary soul. We had faced the demons, and though the scars remained, we were healing, moving forward together. As the days turned into weeks, the dark cloud that had loomed over our family started to dissipate. Amy, now officially divorced and free from the man and the in-laws who had caused her so much pain, was finding her footing again. The legal proceedings had seen her husband and his parents imprisoned for their violence and extortion, a fitting end to their reign of terror. During breakfast one morning, as we all sat together, the atmosphere was lighter, almost buoyant. "You know, I've been thinking," I began, watching Lily attempt to spoon-feed herself, "how far we've come. It's like we've stepped into the light after such a long time in the dark." Amy, with a newfound strength in her eyes, smiled. "Yeah, Mom. It's like I'm finally waking up. The divorce, the trial, it's all behind me now. I can actually look forward to the days ahead." John, always the backbone of our family, nodded in agreement. "That's right. We're all moving forward now, stronger and wiser." Lily's giggles punctuated our conversation, a reminder of the innocence and joy that had returned to our home. As the day unfolded, Amy and I found ourselves in the garden, planting new flowers, a symbolic gesture of our new beginnings. "Mom, can you believe how much Lily's grown?" Amy remarked, her hands deep in the earth. I smiled, handing her a seedling. "She's going to be as strong and beautiful as her mother, and as resilient as her grandma, too." As evening approached, John joined us outside, wrapping an arm around my shoulder. "Look at our little family, Martha. This is what life's all about." I leaned into him, my heart full of gratitude. "Yes, it is. A new beginning, a fresh start for all of us." Dinner was a lively affair, with Amy sharing her plans for the future, her voice tinged with excitement. "I'm thinking of going back to school, maybe even starting my own business. I want Lily to have a life filled with possibilities." John raised his glass, his eyes shining with pride. "To new beginnings, to family, and to justice. May we always find strength in each other." We toasted to our future, the sound of our glasses clinking a sweet symphony of hope and determination. As the night drew in, I tucked Lily into bed, watching as Amy sat beside her, a serene look on her face. I whispered a silent prayer of thanks as I turned off the light, grateful for the second chance we'd been given. As I lay next to John, his presence a constant source of comfort, I knew that our journey hadn't been easy, but it had brought us here, to this moment of peace and togetherness.
I stood in the kitchen, the aroma of brewed coffee hanging in the air, when Arthur's words sliced through the calm like a knife. "Evelyn, we've decided to live with Ethan and Lisa, so you need to leave." His voice, once warm and loving, now held a chilling finality. I blinked, disbelieving. The room spun slightly as I tried to comprehend his words. Lisa, standing beside him with arms crossed, chimed in with a sneer. Yeah, it's about time. You've been nothing but a freeloader, Evelyn. A freeloader? Me? The absurdity of it stung. I had been the backbone of this family's finances for years, while Arthur played the role of the struggling artist, and now this? My gaze shifted from Arthur to Lisa, and then back to Arthur. He avoided my eyes, his face an emotionless mask. Anger and disbelief churned in my stomach. Is this some kind of sick joke? I asked, my voice shaking. No joke, Evelyn. We think it's best for everyone, Arthur said, his tone devoid of the warmth I once knew. The man I married, the man I built a life with, was now evicting me from my own home with the help of our son's wife. The absurdity of it all was overwhelming. I wanted to scream, to shout, to make them see the injustice. But all I could muster was a hollow laugh. You'll regret this, I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. Arthur's eyes finally met mine, but there was no remorse there, just a blank stare. Just pack your things and go, Evelyn. It's for the best. I looked around the kitchen, the heart of our home where I'd cooked countless meals, where we'd shared so many memories. And now they were casting me out like an unwanted guest. I'll leave, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. But remember this, Arthur, you'll regret this day. I turned, leaving them standing in the kitchen, and walked to our bedroom. My bedroom, the room where I had spent over 2 decades of my life, now just a hollow reminder of a love that had withered away. I packed a suitcase with clothes and essentials, grabbed my work laptop, bank book, and some valuables, and headed for the door. As I passed the living room, I saw them, sitting together, already erasing my existence from their lives. You think you've won, I said, pausing at the door. But this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Without waiting for a response, I walked out, the door closing behind me with a finality that echoed in my heart. As I drove to a nearby hotel, my mind raced with plans and possibilities. They thought they could discard me, but they were wrong. I was Evelyn Carter, and I would not go down without a fight. This betrayal would not go unpunished. I checked into the hotel and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The events of the day replayed in my mind, fueling a fire within me. They had unleashed something in me, something fierce and unyielding. I would rebuild my life, but not before making sure Arthur and Lisa understood the gravity of their mistake. They had underestimated me, and that was their biggest mistake. As I drifted into a restless sleep, one thought remained clear in my mind. This was not the end, but a new beginning. A beginning where I would take back control of my life and make them rue the day they crossed Evelyn Carter. The night at the hotel was restless, each tick of the clock a reminder of my shattered life. In the dim light of dawn, memories flooded in, bittersweet and sharp. I met Arthur when life was simpler, filled with dreams and possibilities. He was a graphic designer with a creative spark that ignited something in me. Our courtship was a whirlwind, a blend of passion and promise. We married young, and soon Ethan came along, completing our little family. But time has a way of eroding even the strongest foundations. Arthur's once passionate drive for his work dwindled into complacency. I continued working at a food manufacturing company, my career progressing steadily. It was my salary that kept us afloat, especially when Arthur decided to leave his stable job to pursue freelance work. Are you sure about this, Arthur? I had asked, concern lacing my words. He was confident, almost dismissive. I'll get work from my contacts. Plus, you're doing great with your job. My job, which he casually referred to as a side gig, was the lifeline of our finances. His ignorance of my professional worth was a growing wedge between us. It was during this time that Helen, Arthur's mother, became a central part of our lives. Her health was failing, and I found myself taking on the role of her caregiver. It seemed natural. She was family, after all. But Arthur's lack of involvement was a bitter pill to swallow. Why don't you help more with your mother? I once asked, frustration evident in my voice. Arthur just shrugged, his attention more on his designs than on my words. It was always about his work, his needs, never about Helen or me. As I lay in the hotel bed, the hurt from years of being undervalued and overlooked simmered within me. They had taken my kindness for weakness, my silence for submission. But no more. I would show them the strength of a woman scorned, a woman who had given her all only to be discarded. My plan began to take shape in the early morning light. It was time for Arthur and Lisa to face the consequences of their actions. They thought they had removed a problem from their lives, but in reality, they had ignited a fire. I would start with Arthur's finances. It was time he learned the true value of the money I brought into our household. I knew his freelance work wasn't as lucrative as he pretended. His pride would crumble under the weight of financial realities. And Lisa, with her smug sense of entitlement, would learn that her actions had repercussions. I remembered her disdain, her condescending words. She had no idea about the struggles and sacrifices I had made for this family. I rose from the bed, a new determination coursing through me. I would not be a victim of their cruelty. I would be the architect of their comeuppance. As the sun rose, casting a warm glow through the window, I felt a sense of empowerment. Evelyn Carter was no longer just a name. It was a symbol of resilience and retribution. They had underestimated me, but they would soon learn the cost of their betrayal. This was not just about revenge, it was about justice. And I would have it, no matter what it took. The first rays of sunlight brought clarity and resolve. I checked out of the hotel with a single goal in mind, to begin my carefully crafted plan of retribution against Arthur and Lisa. Returning home to gather the rest of my belongings was a calculated move. I needed to see Arthur to gauge his reactions to feed the fire of my resolve. The house felt different as I stepped in, colder, unwelcoming. Arthur was in the living room, his back to me, lost in his thoughts. "I've come for the rest of my things," I announced, my voice steady. He turned, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before it settled into an indifferent mask. "Fine. Take whatever you need." As I moved through the house, memories taunted me, but I pushed them aside. This was no time for sentimentality. It was a time for action. In our bedroom, I quickly sorted through our shared life, compartmentalizing emotions, focusing on the task. Clothes, personal items, some documents. I was methodical, leaving no trace of myself behind. Arthur hovered at the doorway, watching. "Evelyn, are you sure about this?" His question was a mix of confusion and a faint hint of concern. It was almost laughable. "You made your choice, Arthur. Now live with it," I replied, without looking at him. I could feel his gaze on me, but I didn't falter. This was the man who had underestimated me, who had pushed me out of my own life. No more. The final item I packed was a photo of us in happier times. I stared at it, a bitter smile on my lips. Then, without a second thought, I left it on the dresser, a reminder of what he had lost. As I carried my belongings to the car, Arthur's voice stopped me. "Evelyn, about the finances." I turned, meeting his eyes. "What about them? We might need to discuss how we'll handle things moving forward." "Oh, now you're concerned about finances?" My voice was tinged with sarcasm. "Don't worry, Arthur. You'll manage. After all, I was just a side gig, remember?" His expression faltered, guilt and realization dawning. But it was too late for regrets. I drove away without looking back, the chapter of Arthur and me firmly closed. But this was just the beginning. My mind raced with plans, each more satisfying than the last. I knew Arthur's weaknesses, his pride, his finances, his superficial understanding of my contributions. I would use these to my advantage. He would learn the hard way the value of what he had so callously discarded. And Lisa, her arrogance, would be her downfall. I would make sure of it. She thought she could step into my life, take my place without consequence. She was sorely mistaken. I found a small apartment, a temporary refuge, as I plotted my next moves. It was modest but sufficient for my needs. As I unpacked, the reality of my situation sank in. I was alone, but I was also free. Free to rebuild, free to exact revenge, free to be the woman I was meant to be. That night, as I lay in bed in my new apartment, I felt a surge of empowerment. They had pushed me to the edge, but I had emerged stronger, more determined. Evelyn Carter would no longer be a victim. She would be a force to be reckoned with. Settled in my new apartment, I strategized my next moves. The first step was to confront the financial facade Arthur had constructed. It was time he faced the reality of our situation, the reality he so conveniently ignored. I started by securing my financial assets. I transferred my savings to a new account, ensuring Arthur had no access. This was my hard-earned money, and I would not let him squander it any longer. Next, I prepared for the inevitable legal battle. I contacted a lawyer, someone known for their tenacity and success in divorce cases. As I explained my situation, the lawyer nodded, understanding the gravity of my case. "We'll make sure you get what you deserve, Mrs. Carter," she assured me, her voice firm and confident. I felt a sense of relief, knowing I had a professional in my corner. This wasn't just about money, it was about justice. A few days later, I received a call from Arthur. His voice was strained, a hint of desperation creeping in. "Evelyn, we need to talk about the divorce and the finances." I agreed to meet, curious to see how he would handle this confrontation. We met at a quiet cafe, a neutral ground for what was to be a decisive discussion. Arthur looked worn, the stress of the situation clearly taking its toll. "Evelyn, I think we rushed into this. Maybe we can work things out?" His plea was pathetic, a stark contrast to the confident man I once knew. "Work things out? You threw me out, Arthur. You made your choice." He flinched at my words, but I felt no sympathy. This was the bed he had made. "We can't afford a divorce, Evelyn, not with my financial situation." "Oh, now you admit it," I retorted, my voice laced with scorn. "You're finally facing reality." Arthur's eyes darted around the cafe, his pride wounded. I thought we could come to an agreement, without lawyers." I leaned in, my gaze steady. "You want an agreement? Fine. I want $10,000. That's my price for an amicable divorce." Arthur's face paled. "10,000? I don't have that kind of money." "That's not my problem, Arthur. You wanted me out. You pay the price." He struggled for words, his facade crumbling. I'll see what I can do." I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "You have 1 week, Arthur. 1 week to give me what I'm owed." As I left the cafe, I could feel Arthur's eyes on me, but I didn't look back. This was more than just a financial transaction. It was a statement. I was no longer the woman he could manipulate and discard. Back in my apartment, I allowed myself a small smile. The tables were turning. Arthur was finally understanding the cost of his betrayal. And this was just the beginning. There was more to come, and I would make sure he paid every penny of the emotional debt he owed me. The week after confronting Arthur was a whirlwind of activity. I found solace in action, each step a move towards reclaiming my life. But the true test came when Arthur called to arrange the exchange of the $10,000. We met at the same cafe, a public space where emotions couldn't easily run amok. Arthur was there first, looking more defeated than ever. He handed me an envelope, his hand trembling slightly. "This is everything I could gather," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't count the money there. I didn't need to. The look in his eyes told me it was all there. "Consider this the end of our chapter, Arthur." As I turned to leave, I could feel his gaze heavy on my back. But I walked away without hesitation. This was more than a financial transaction. It was a reclaiming of my dignity. Back in my apartment, I counted the money. Each bill was a testament to my resilience, a down payment on my new life. But it wasn't the end of my plan. Not yet. The next step was Ethan and Lisa. Arthur's betrayal was one thing, but their complicity stung deeper. It was time they faced their own consequences. A few days later, the opportunity presented itself. Ethan called, his voice strained. "Mom, we need to talk. Can you come over?" I agreed, curious about what prompted his sudden request. At their house, the atmosphere was tense. Ethan fidgeted nervously, while Lisa's usual arrogance was replaced by unease. "What's this about, Ethan?" I asked, my tone neutral. "It's about Dad," Ethan began, his eyes avoiding mine. "He's in a bad place, financially. We might lose the house." Lisa chimed in, her voice laced with frustration. "And it's your fault with that ridiculous demand for money." My heart hardened at her words. "My fault? I was thrown out of my own home, Lisa. Did you expect me to just walk away without anything?" "But we're family," Ethan interjected, a note of desperation in his voice. "Family?" I scoffed. "Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me." Lisa's face reddened, her facade crumbling. "Well, what do you expect us to do now? You've taken everything." I stood, my resolve unshaken. "You expect sympathy from me? You made your choices. Now, live with them." As I left, I could hear them arguing, their voices a mix of blame and regret. But it was too late for apologies. They had shown their true colors, and now they were facing the consequences. In the solitude of my apartment, I reflected on the day's events. I had set out to reclaim my dignity, to make them understand the pain they had caused, and I had succeeded. But as I lay in bed that night, a sense of emptiness crept in. Revenge had brought satisfaction, yes, but it hadn't filled the void left by my shattered family. Yet I knew there was no going back. This was my path now, and I had to see it through to the end. As the days passed, my life settled into a new rhythm, one defined by independence and strength. Yet, the final act of my plan remained. It was time to expose Arthur and Lisa's true nature, to bring their deceit into the light. I began by digging into Arthur's financial affairs. It wasn't difficult. His desperation had made him careless. I discovered a trail of debt, poor investments, and most shockingly, evidence of an affair. It was the ammunition I needed. I confronted Arthur once more, this time at his office. It was a place where he felt in control, but I was about to shatter that illusion. "Arthur, we need to talk," I said, my voice calm yet assertive as I entered his office. He looked up, surprise etched on his face. "Evelyn, what are you doing here?" "I know about the affair, Arthur, and the debts," I stated, watching as his face drained of color. That's ridiculous," he stammered, but the guilt in his eyes betrayed him. "Don't insult my intelligence. I have proof," I countered, my words sharp. Arthur sank into his chair, the facade of confidence crumbling. "Evelyn, please, let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about. You've made your bed, now lie in it." My words were cold, a reflection of the void he had left in my heart. I left his office, leaving him to stew in his guilt and fear. But my plan wasn't complete. Lisa was next. I invited her for coffee, a public setting where she couldn't easily escape. When she arrived, her usual brashness was absent, replaced by caution. "Evelyn, what is this about?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "It's about you and Arthur," I said, meeting her gaze. "Your role in this whole mess." Lisa shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, but you do," I countered. "You encouraged Arthur's decisions, thinking it would benefit you. But now, you're just as responsible for the fallout." Lisa's facade cracked, her composure slipping. "You can't blame me for everything." "I can, and I do. You were part of this, Lisa. You can't escape that," I replied, my voice steady. Lisa looked away, unable to meet my gaze. She knew the truth, even if she couldn't admit it. As I left the cafe, I felt a sense of closure. I had exposed their deceit, their selfishness. They were left to face the consequences of their actions, just as I had faced mine. In the days that followed, the fallout from my revelations hit hard. Arthur's affair became public knowledge, his reputation tarnished. Lisa, caught in the crossfire, faced her own set of challenges. Her marriage with Ethan strained under the weight of the truth. I watched from a distance, my heart heavy yet vindicated. They had underestimated me, but I had shown them the strength of my resolve. Yet, in the quiet moments, I couldn't help but wonder if the price of revenge was too high. I had regained my dignity, but at what cost? The family I once loved was now broken, a casualty of the war I had waged. In the weeks following my confrontation with Arthur and Lisa, the repercussions of their actions, and mine, began to unfold in full view. The house that once echoed with our laughter now stood as a silent monument to broken dreams and betrayal. Arthur's career suffered greatly from the scandal. His clients left, unwilling to associate with a man whose personal life was in shambles. His financial troubles, once hidden behind a veil of pride, were now laid bare for all to see. Lisa, on the other hand, found herself isolated. Her marriage with Ethan strained to the breaking point, as the truth of her manipulation and greed surfaced. The social circles that once welcomed her now turned their backs, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Ethan had moved out, unable to cope with the continuous quarrels and the stark reality of their situation. Lisa, once so full of confidence and disdain, was now a shadow of her former self. And then there was Arthur. He called me one evening, his voice a mixture of sorrow and desperation. "Evelyn, I'm sorry. For everything." His apology, though late, was a testament to the depth of his downfall. "Your sorry can't undo what's been done, Arthur." I know I've made mistakes, but I'm paying for them now," he said, his voice breaking. "You're not the only one paying, Arthur. We all are," I replied, the weight of our collective pain heavy in my voice. We ended the call with no promises of reconciliation, only the somber acknowledgement of our shared history and its painful end. In the aftermath, I found solace in my newfound independence. The pain of the past was still there, a dull ache that ebbed and flowed with the days. But there was also a sense of freedom, a liberation from the chains of a loveless marriage and the suffocating deceit that had come with it. As I rebuilt my life piece by piece, I realized that revenge, though sweet, was also bittersweet. It had given me closure, yes, but at a cost. The family I had once cherished was now just a memory, a lesson learned in the hardest way possible. But life has a way of moving forward, and so did I. I found joy in small things, in the quiet moments of solitude, in the new beginnings that each day brought. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined me. I was Evelyn Carter, a woman who had faced her demons and emerged stronger. The journey had been long and fraught with pain, but I had survived, and in that survival I had found a new sense of self, a new purpose. As I look back now, I realize that the greatest revenge was not in the downfall of Arthur and Lisa, but in the rise of my own spirit. In the end, I had not just survived, I had thrived.